Hello, this is Andrew here. Welcome to Lecture 7 of the Digital Games in Contemporary Youth Culture module. This lecture will be on games for social justice, games for social change and global justice. What we'll see quickly is quite a bit of what we are about to discuss should start bringing together what I'm about to discuss should start bringing together strands from the different lectures that we've had, mostly around serious games, and most recently in looking at gamification and this sort of social cultural phenomena of game devices and technologies and behaviors kind of crossing over into real world interactions, and mostly just arriving at this sort of convergence of a kind of a quite a unique time that we're living in, and looking at a number of applications of game environments in these types of movements towards global justice and movements of political social change and activism, I suppose. So we're just going to look at where we've come from really in relation to that. We've got the looking at Bogos and Frasca in particular around the rhetoric of games, persuasive and simulation rhetorics, and educational games, and these type of other purposes of serious games. And to this end, I suppose we look at persuasive games. The operative word here probably being the persuasive element of them, and that being like some sort of impart onto a user, a player, or someone who's interacting with this environment or device. And that's probably just a key thing to kind of keep in the back of your head now going through this, because we look at how this is expanding upon or being extrapolated into different environments. The gamification, as we discussed, the repurposing of, we look on the other side of it of what we've already spoken about in terms of markets and marketing opening up to apply game elements to their practice, and in general just sort of kind of knowledge economies opening up to this sort of more novel approach, wherein we have this sort of other inversion on the back of that, something quite kind of radical of it being reclaimed for social good, essentially. And overall, I suppose what gaming gives, this sort of social change is this vital aspect of complexity, I suppose, where everything is a bit more noisy and whittled down, where games do need this sort of intrigue and a space in a domain and a more sort of multiple modal different levels of interactions that can happen as a result of that. Yeah, and then just what we'll see now is games just being able to back up a longer campaign, essentially, or forming some sort of advocacy and being quite akin to the realm of new journalism or documentary filmmaking, I suppose, where those forms of production, modes of production and modes of interaction would allow for like longer, more extensive sort of inquiries into something which mightn't, might necessarily get it otherwise. Um, just on that point of a campaign, there'll be links at the end just towards all these, but the GOP arcade was set up in advance of the election, essentially, and it was mostly just an interesting environment to see games being produced and almost mass produced at like an incredible rate that could stay with an election campaign, essentially, and throw up I haven't included who came up with this, but it's fantastic work. Well worth checking out. Again, I'll put the link at the bottom. In particular, the one you see there, "Bomb the Right Place," which is really kind of deceptively sophisticated to my mind, of just really just kind of playing with the idea of how little is known about geopolitics, and essentially, or just the geography of where people live, yet how readily deploying bombs and destroying places and civilian life in these places seems to be like not a big deal. So it's kind of it's essentially, I suppose we could look at this as like some sort of new form of satire presented as a campaign environment that games can be produced and iterated or replicated at that sort of speed now, which is quite interesting, that they can keep up with an election campaign and all its twists and turns, and just shift the boundaries and the kind of constructs in a game environment next to that. Also, we look at just the educational tools of games, where with this one, Food Force, the UN World Food Program, you get kind of quite simplified in one way, but in another way just a really interesting introductory level where you can see different types of parameters, conditions, constructs, what would be applied as game rules, representing something from the real world essentially. So you can give quite a firm indication of what sort of what entails in a certain profession or in a discipline or in some sort of emergency response to a humanitarian issue. So again, kind of like that serious game simulation environment, that type of environment where the games can inform and really educate on the back of that, really. So we can see that being a really interesting learning tool essentially. We look at, this is in the wrong place, or I've included it twice, but so just in terms of journalism, I suppose we're just going to look at a few different examples of sites or new takes on technologies that could be seen as that sort of more game interactive sense, not traditional journalism, not traditional media like documentary filmmaking or whatever, but using these sort of technologies to expand on stories and different ways of telling them and to source them as well. So this one we have at the wbz.org, a kind of crowdsourced form of journalism where it was thrown out to communities of users of what sources, what stories should be researched and kind of expanded upon next. So it's kind of indicating or touching in a direction where that sort of idea of deriving content from a community and people taking a kind of a stake in that and a responsibility over that being the vital element of that, I suppose, rather than something, if it was being put in some sort of gamified marketing bracket, might look a bit more glib or just empty essentially. So there's a couple of online resources I'm going to just look at now. The next one is called Zero Accountable, and it's citizen inquiry into the subway crash in Valencia in 2006. So I'm just going to show this is how it appears on the website, and you can just see this different version of a documentary or how to expand that information.
Moriren 41 persones. 2 persones més moririen després per les ferides que patiren en el hospital. Mi marido me envió un correo y me dijo, llámame cuando puedas. Y ese correo lo vi, pues no sé si a las 2 horas o así. Y entonces hablé con él y me dijo que tu sobrina Violeta va en el metro. Y está bastante grave. Bueno, no recuerdo muy bien lo que me dijo, pero solo recuerdo que se habló de Violeta, mi sobrina. Entonces llamé a mi hermana y evidentemente no me daba señal su móvil.
La meva sogra em telefonar al mòbil plorosa que, diguem-ne, la nena no llega. Això significa que la meva dona, Maribel, que va ser que va morir en l'accident, ella era infermera.
Okay, yes, so we can see that sort of, layering and separating of information and different ways of, a story, especially this being what it is just an ongoing justice campaign and, a device towards advocacy, essentially, that there's allowing a user to interact with it in this way and find any sort of information, allow any level or depth of information what allows for that sort of much more complex, essentially, form of storytelling rather than just a straightforward narrative or a director's vision of what this story might be, especially when it's got so many aspects to it and people who are involved and affected by it. So it really opens up new avenues for explaining, events essentially, and those not to take on a traditional story form, but to be something that can be, interpreted in many other ways and be much more inclusive, essentially. So next one I want to look at is the Soci project, again described by its makers as slow journalism. So this kind of we'll watch this and then I'll come back after.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sochi 2014 could not be where it is today without support, vision, and passion of one man, President Vladimir Putin. Mr. President, members of the International Olympic Committee, Sochi is a unique place. On the seashore, you can enjoy a fine spring day, but up in the mountains, it's winter. We are allocating around some of $12 billion for this. Mesdames et messieurs, soutenez s'il vous plaît le rêve olympique des millions de Russes. The Olympic family is going to feel at home in Sochi. Thank you.
So again, this, as I described, as slow journalism. So you've got this like 5-year period prior to the Winter Olympics where, this is essentially a watchdog, I suppose, looking at the developments and the kind of the amount of different issues and, humanitarian issues in particular associated with that. Again, embedded in this sort of environment where you've got this multimedia model with different sort of profiles, different layers of information, all separated and kind of, recombined in whatever way a user might want to interact with it. So it breaks up the linearity of a story and gives a really rich profile of a place and a time essentially. So that being, two really sort of interesting takes on potential uses of like a different type of user interaction with that, or those sort of like playful almost aspects of someone being able to receive information and kind of parse it in a different way. Yeah, there was the other one before. So yeah, we can see there that we've got those different types of information, coming together through the use of new technologies. I just want to give one kind of firmer, more game-related, traditional game-related sort of examples of this, the Woomera Immigration Reception and Processing Centre in South Australia, and this kind of idea of a game being able to make hidden things visible as well, which is a bit, something that's kind of another element with that, where this Woomera camp was quite a place, kind of shrouded in a lot of controversy, where it would have been a detention facility for refugees and immigrants who had unauthorized arrivals in southern Australia, intended to hold 400 people, but clearly this all got out of hand, and by its peak in 2000 had like 1,500 detainees in it. Overall, I suppose, Australia was kind of cited as a model for how to, being very responsible and, presenting a productive model of how to, welcome and receive immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers and such in Europe, but obviously this being one of the worst examples of just human rights violations, really. So I just want to show a kind of a news documentary of that, a bit of reportage, and then we'll get to the game aspect of it there just right after.
I think I was myself very depressed.
Why?
I think from the sheer volume of distress that I saw and the experiences that I witnessed, and just the nonsensical nature of it all, and the fact that I couldn't rationally explain any of it. I couldn't rationalise anything. It didn't make any sense. 7th of April 2002, a 12-year-old boy tried to kill himself today. 6th of June 2002, a female detainee signed a suicide note in blood. It was just a terrible time, and I thought to myself, God, how can I keep watching this? How can I keep seeing this happening to people?
It didn't start out that way. Dr. Simon Lockwood arrived in the outback town of Woomera with his wife and young family in July 2000, just after the detention centre had been opened. He'd always wanted to work in rural Australia, and he was thrilled to take a job at Woomera's local hospital. Soon he was also treating asylum seekers inside the detention centre, and he loved it.
I hadn't seen a lot of the things that I saw there, like malaria and typhoid and tuberculosis. I thought, gee, this is one of the best jobs I've had. I'm going to learn a lot here.
But Woomera was soon engulfed by an epidemic that Dr. Lockwood could not contain. As detainees lost hope, they were overwhelmed by mental illness.
I saw so many proud and fantastic people just break down to a level that you would find hard to believe, that are grovelling on the floor in my clinic room and saying, please help me get out of here. I found that really difficult to cope with. I'd sometimes go home towards the end there and I'd cry myself.
Dr. Lockwood watched Woomera descend into a living hell, and it wasn't just detainees who were broken. The trauma of the families locked inside spread to the Australian officers paid to guard them.
21st of February 2003. There was another meeting with work cover today. Many of the officers have been damaged. They suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, generalised anxiety, and other psychological illnesses. And a lot of them weren't able to work. Many of them were put in profoundly dangerous situations where they were in the middle of a riot and some thugs had beaten them to a pulp.
The thugs, as Dr. Lockwood calls them, were a small group of about 15 male detainees whom he says routinely instigated violence and riots. He says none of them were genuine refugees, and he wonders why the government didn't move them out.
Most of those guys were criminals. 31st of December 2002. It looked like a war zone. However, the instigators, the thugs, they saved their belongings. The belongings of the other detainees went up in flames. The moderate detainees, who are the majority, regard these others as absolute animals. Anyone with any type of morals would feel the same.
Even the little township of Woomera, population then just 800, was eventually gripped by the growing horrors of camp life.
A lot of the officers would cope with the stress by going to the pub and drinking themselves into oblivion or gambling on the pokies, and so there was a lot of social problems in the town.
But did the government know that it had a mass psychiatric disaster on its hands inside the detention centre?
They did know. They definitely knew that there was a major amount of the population were very sick.
And they just decided not to do anything about it?
Well, they must have, because they didn't do anything about it.
Unlike many of his medical colleagues, Dr. Lockwood decided not to go public. Instead, Simon Lockwood took his case directly to Canberra, addressing a meeting of officials from the Immigration Department or DIMIA. For more than 2 hours, Dr. Lockwood told a room full of bureaucrats about the detention centre's catastrophic impact on families, on children.
And then towards the end of the meeting, one of the bureaucrats said to me, in front of everyone there, that sounds all well and good to us, Simon, but we don't want to make it so nice for them in detention that they won't want to leave. I knew that I'd spoken for 2 hours, probably for nothing.
By now, Woomera was the country's most controversial detention centre, attracting violent protests, which Simon Lockwood says only made camp life even more difficult.
So we can see, a massive injustice and a humanitarian disaster there that lasted for the duration of the Woomera facility, which was all of 4 years. There was somewhat of a media blackout at the time. It wasn't reported. You see, there was a lot of kind of grassroots protest that went on around it, but in terms of people actually knowing and being able to kind of making this situation visible, there was a really interesting response by a lot of game developers in Australia at the time, and they would have it was only arrived to a prototype stage, but it would have it basically came from every step of Arts Council funding essentially in Australia. So, just that a negotiation at that degree. Most of the developers who worked on the game would have done so anonymously or uncredited because they worked in the video games industry and didn't want to risk their jobs. So you can already see this type of, game development really buffeting up against industry and what would be regarded as acceptable practice or somewhat could backfire. On the other side of it is the scandal or the criticism around building a game environment to depict such serious incidences, and something which is obviously an ongoing political and legal and humanitarian situation, and that looking kind of something somewhat cheap on behalf of the game developers in the eyes of other people. And it kind of speaks a lot to how games were depicted at that time also. What it does do is shine a light and give, as you can see, even simple things like Google Maps not being available or journalists not having access to this environment, where it made something which was visible, and not only visible, but something that you could walk around and interact with, which is quite a unique thing. And this all being done off, the Half-Life engine, so it's somewhat clunky, I suppose, but still giving a real feel of a certain environment that the people were having to live in physically, looking at the environment, and obviously in terms of like a story base or the character base. The characters being researched from real people and their real stories, and a lot of real incidents being put in there. So that sort of collide of the seeming naivety of game designers or game environments or play and fun next to an emergent sort of industry and the potentials of like a negative knock-on for developers of these games show kind of a really interesting collide of things that happened in around Woomera. And the game didn't see the light of day. There'll be a link at the end for downloading the prototype or what they did complete in any way, just to look at. But again, just to see that sort of uniqueness, or games being used as a campaign environment, or to make something invisible a bit clearer, is a really interesting point, I suppose, from that. So that just the complexity of game environments being a really important tool or resource for different versions of storytelling, advocacy, different types of journalism or reportage, or just interactions with things, or campaigns, or towards social movements, essentially allowing for multiple interpretations, different sort of complexity, nuanced things that don't in a film sense wouldn't make the cut, essentially, isn't a notion here, because there is no linear cut, and it is expansive and inclusive of everything. and for a user or someone who's interacting to discern what level of information they want to receive from that, being a vital thing, I suppose. So, that whole idea of like, be it a polemic or authored piece of work or something which could, can be criticized as a result of that, is still there in a degree that you have game developers and designers, and you have these developers and designers who are, making the boundaries, but the parameters are much broader, I suppose, where there's room for much more scope, and that's probably a more diffuse sort of narrative or author involved in these pieces. And overall, I suppose that just removes any sort of risk of spin or looking like it's somewhat if it's if it's like the alienating aspect of what can happen when there's an agenda attached, I suppose, or if it's like you can just establish more facts in many different layers and ways and have those sort of parsed in whatever way a user might want to do it, which just it allows much more essentially. So all we're really talking about there is just this sort of an environment for artists and designers and developers really, and just a different sort of level of toolkits, the responsibility and the issues of it. In terms of games, you're looking at, okay, so this is an extension of serious games essentially, or persuasive games. But at the same breath, we just have this sort of, I want to profile one artist really who would have been involved in the Woomer project there initially as well. But I think he kind of, his work's quite interesting on the approach to it, just to show the potentials, I suppose, for, these sort of interactions with new technologies from a social justice, social change sort of point of view. I'll just run a video. His name's Julian Oliver, and then I'll come back to it after this.
I've been actively exhibiting since around about 1996, developing and exhibiting. Traditionally, I'd be called a media artist. Yet more recently, I'm calling myself, or referring to the framework I'm doing, as kind of critical engineering. Yeah, I have funny views on that, really. I mean, I increasingly think it doesn't matter what I call myself. It doesn't matter whether I call what I make art, because people will call it art anyway, in some way. Art is really that space that we give within culture and society to take risks, to reflexively and critically engage, the world that we live in, and so, however, I've needed to sort of move a little bit away from calling myself a media artist and really start looking at, well, engineering is a creative, critical practice. So yeah, I'm not so much calling myself an artist these days. If I had to, gun to the head, it'd be Medienkunstler, media artist. Well, I've always been interested in engaging technology on low-level terms, and that's something that's really integral, important to someone that does a lot of, hacking or something like that. When I was very young, I took things to pieces and tried to put them back together again, and of course often failed. But in doing so, I learned a lot about the actual substance of the technology itself. I learned really about what it was comprised of. I'm less of a person that's a user, and more of a person that's really interested in getting down to the materiality of it. And really thinking about technology, can it really be a clay? Can it really be deeply manipulated? And I also recognize with the dawn of the internet and stuff that as technology, as we use technology, it uses us. And so then things automatically become kind of a little bit more political. Computer games have been a long love of mine since I was a small boy, and I've always wanted. I wanted to look at, can I engage computer games on a term other than just being a player? Can it also be kind of a material? Can I really bend it and shape it, and can I take that aesthetic direction, pervert it or subvert it? How can I take this thing that I bought off the shelf and push it further? And yeah, I got into this experimental game development thing. I was just modding was still with Quake 1 and Quake 2. People could actually make maps and and game their creations and stuff. Looked around on the internet. There was basically 4 or 5 other people that were doing it back then. Talked to people by phone and asked, "Do you know anyone?" People that I knew would be in a position to say so. And realized that there was this really interesting, burgeoning, small grassroots movement, really coming up out of the ground, particularly in the US and even one guy in China, and decided to archive it, to make a page, to tell people about it, and to try and get the ball rolling. And sure enough, it eventually became kind of a big thing. More and more people were starting to see that the computer game is not just a consumable product, but actually something that can be manipulated, that can be explored. There's such imaginary and exciting spaces anyway. Why not get in there and have a go? I wanted to just not put models, laying it over video, such that it looked like it was a part of the scene. I was doing a lot of visual AR at the time, heaps of it. And I wanted to do more than just simply taking static data, 3D data, and just plonking it in a room or attached to someone's t-shirt or anything like that. I saw that, well, surely it's possible to actually take a wooden cube with just some printed out paper on it and actually make a whole rich joystick or a tangible interface out of that. I could tilt the cube to the left and the man could walk, tilt to the right and it could walk the other way. It just seemed to me such a natural combination of two technologies. I can't think of the exact moment that I decided to build it into a game. It just appeared. I don't know. It seemed like the next obvious thing to do when I was playing around with cubes in AR. I think that augmented reality has a tremendous potential to be able to provide a platform for critically re-engaging the world, right? And games are really interesting because they're naturally critical by nature. They're self-improvement platforms in themselves. They're inherently experimental. They demand experimentation in order to be able to actually progress. So therefore, I see that AR as applied to games is definitely an improvement. I'd much rather see AR games in the urban environment than I would Google ads, for instance. Yeah. I think that law and law writing is essentially a kind of modern fiction of sorts. They're just making it up as they go along. These guys, they really are. I mean, when I get a New York marketing firm writing to me telling me that I should be going to jail for creating an interface for people to be able to put art up on a billboard instead of an advertisement, if he was Saatchi and Saatchi, or for instance, worked for a huge company like that, he could take me to court, and a new law could form out of it. This is how laws are written, and I think there's definitely there will be a land grab game, like a gold rush, for the right to be able to expose people to expose the visual cortex to data. Augmented reality may be seen to be a interruption of service, and they would need to retain the exclusive rights. That's a very dystopic angle, but you're seeing all sorts of things happening in the law now that just make no rational sense at all. I have every right to augment my reality. But I think surely there'd be marketing firms that would like to try and take that right away from you if it messes with their billboards. I'm very interested in drones at the moment, and I want to get a little bit to test my abilities with a little bit of aviation, or at least autonomous vehicles. I want to. I've got a few projects. One for sure is classifying drones. I wanted to get back to computer vision. I want to put devices up in the air that can classify these police and state drones, and then capture unintended emissions from them. Look at different trajectories for I guess
bringing that down to the realm of civil knowledge, like the hells in our skies. I'm interested in that. We're doing a lot more work with the transparency grenade in that kind of direction. And pretty much any day now I'm going to be needing a lawyer for another project that I'm starting. But no, just keep pushing it. Yeah, keep pushing it.
Okay, so there'll be another video from Julian Oliver now in a minute, but I think it's really interesting type of work, and there's a lot of things expanded upon there in terms of the different interactions with technologies and that sort of play, disruption, hacking sort of environment to step into that when it comes to these technologies, and consider that sort of critical engineering approach rather than a media artist approach, and just what that expands on once we kind of once we open the bonnet of our dependence on technologies and the inner workings of them, essentially, So just it's really valid, and it's going to frame where we're going next with this. But Julia Oliver and the people he'd work with would quote Bruno Latour and this sort of idea of black boxing, being a the kind of the weird blip, possibly where we are right now, where we have this sort of like when you have a scientific or a technical product that is invisible from its own success, essentially, so you don't really doubt it, where you've got this slim smartphone packed away in your pocket, all completely packed up with bespoke chips and cables and wired together in a really unique way, which has a patent attached to it, and people don't even kind of open it, never mind criticize or wonder what that might be under the bonnet of that. This idea of black boxing being something that it's an alienating device, essentially. We can look at it that way, where we do, our dual relationship with the technologies being something so close that it's innate but also totally alien, as if we don't understand it, simultaneously being somewhat of a phenomena, and this is probably what's kind of driving mass consumption of different technologies right now, and probably to all our detriments, that there's no critical thinking around that. For example, we look at like what Oliver's talking about there of what sort of devices are in the skies, and what sort of levels of surveillance, or what types of surveillance, or what sort of information is being garnered and kind of kept, where is it being kept, why is it being kept, and how much of that is like a democratic process. All these things being vital questions that we need to ask, and the answers to them probably come from artists who would find some way to illustrate this and make it apparent. So I'm just going to step away from that at the moment, just look at like that sort of disruption or hacking, or like finding a new way of interacting with stuff, and show probably my favorite YouTuber. He's a bit glib and a bit abrupt at times, but Joel is with Vinesauce is just really it's really interesting. We'll watch this and I'll come back after that.
When I was 5-6 years old, I asked my dad, "Dad, what is technology?" And my dad goes, "It's magic, Joel, it's magic." Ever since that day, little Joel was never the same. All right, let me scale it down, scale it up, scale it down, set as background. All right, let's see how it looks. It looks like a plate of oatmeal, but this child has no idea. She's like, "What did you do to the computer?" She's like, "Ugh." It's still so fast. This computer is still up to date. But I will change it. I will change this for the better. Best downloader. Absolutely. This doesn't look fishy at all. Welcome to super fast download manager setup. Dealkeeper. I'll be sure to contact Dealkeeper when my credit card information is gone. Thank you. Dankeschön. What's this? I have little space? Well, time to go to the internet and see how we can fix this. Rig clean. Live help. Should we call these guys and be like, hey, My computer's flipping out. Can you help me out? And they're like, you specify your credit card information. How do I actually... Oh my god, guys. This comment section is from fake people. Marty Chapman, JD, Matt, Anonymous, and Anonymous. There's no option to comment. These are made-up reviews to make idiots think it's safe. My pony. What is this beast on my floor? Thanks for choosing Rocket Bro. I didn't do that! Oh, absolutely. Badass Mafia tool. Facebook Blaster. Well, that's the most honest name for a software I've ever seen. Facebook Blaster. You will have nothing left. Account Suitcase. What do you mean, all the scammers that have collected your information? Is that what they use? Again, very obvious name for something. Okay, I am man enough to confess this. When I was 11 years old, I had a desktop stripper. Okay? Now, the worst part, I couldn't get it off my PC. So I had to ask my dad. My dad was so disappointed. Oh, yes. Yes, the George W. Bush cursor. God bless America. I can't believe that's a thing. I'm clicking. Oh my god, yes, I want the gun. Give me the gun. Yes. Religion. Please, give me Jesus. The Pope. Absolutely. Love your scrolls. This is oh my sweet Jesus. There's Jesus. Oh, there's a burning super death sword. just why? Why do people download this stuff? I cannot believe a human being would do this. You know, nothing says this more welcome than this creepy smiley repeatedly jamming the welcome sign in his crotch. Don't stop. Keep injecting me. No. What did you just say to me? Don't stop. Keep injecting me those smileys. I love it. If you're sick, if you're already sick with smileys, then why are you taking more? Even mom would understand there is something wrong. Even mom. Keep injecting me those smileys. You know what the worst part about this is? I don't know what he's doing, but that cannot be a good way to live your life. Are you sure you want to cancel? Are you sure you want to cancel the free smiley installation? Cancel. What is he doing? Please don't go. Please don't go. Oh, now you're just making me sad. Now you're tugging at my heartstrings there, buddy. Your feedback is important to us. Will you at least tell us why you canceled the installation? Or yes, I'll. Oh my god. Feedback. Nobody said any. They had to close it down. It pains me to do this, and it'll be the only one ever. This is the worst idea since I drank a martini with my eye. I'm not even joking about that. I legit did that once. Bonzi Buddy seems to be having issues. The whole thing is a big issue. Oh, thank God. I think Bonzi Buddy doesn't work on Windows 7. This is the best thing ever! Hallelujah! Fuck! I thought that everything was fine. But no. No. FIFA 14 for Windows 8. Yeah. Animated Christmas tree for desktop. Just hell talk. What is this woman conveying? What is she doing? This is a sign of confused bewilderment. Like, Can you really blame her when this face is staring at you? Like, hey, how's it going? Look at it! It's the worst thing ever! Can I interact with it? Add Christmas tree. Oh, you can do several? Oh my god, I want there, I want it there, I want it there. Alright, there's so much shit on the screen I can't even see. Install.
Soft Tonic, now available on your PC.
No!
Let's start using the application.
No!
Do you know what software you're looking for?
No!
Soft and related to those installed on your PC.
I blame you! You did
can
this!
also check
You
out
did
our
this!
recommendations as well as screenshots and
Screenshots?
video tutorials.
What did you...
You can also read
tutorials?
users' opinions and learn about their experience when using that
Tutorials?
program.
Tutorials?
Once you've decided to download the program, you can be sure it will be fast and virus-free. We scan them with more than 30 antivirus engines.
30?
When the
One is not
download
enough?
finished,
So good.
Soft Tonic for Windows, the easiest way to discover,
To destroy
organize,
your
and update
PC.
your
And these Christmas trees are not helping at all. One bit. Oh, my poor computer. I don't think I ever messed a computer up this bad. Tutorials. Tutorials. Wait, you buy MIDIs? You buy MIDIs? Special order and request? $200? Skrillex, scary monsters, and nice sprites MIDI. Oh, Lord. Wow. Wow. It sounds like farting in a bathtub. Brr. Sick drop. Sick drop. Brr. This is the worst image. This is the worst image. Oh my god, look at my scroll bar. It's like a whole Twinkie. Oh god. Good old Bloogle. Oh lord. Will this look good or will it look bad? How to infect a Mac with virus and other malware. Oh? Look at this. Pussy Destroyer. Pussy Destroyer. Cut to the chase and do what we should have done. Loose. Finally we can play this. Let's see what this is all about. If you don't know what Loose is, basically it's a program, it's a game that kills your files. Killing in Loose deletes your files. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's Joel showed I don't know, pure techno joy really, just how to interact or disrupt a lot of those sort of notional things that people might be fearful of or wonder, and you just see it kind of played out as a YouTube sort of demonstration like that, and turned into like almost a game, I suppose, is the vital part of that. Again, back to that black boxing idea from Bruno Latour, this idea of looking under the bonnet, not being fearful of it, and, just trying to push it a little bit just to see what gives on the other side of it. And just the technologies being as resilient and robust now as they have ever been for that to be possible. And, we look at that sort of end of, what I look at Joel being potentially is, it's almost like a watchdog or, a different type of media studies or critique for an accelerated age in the computer, and, how it's actually used and interacted with, and just done with that sort of exuberant joy and fun aspect of it, which is quite entertaining. I'm going to look at Julian Oliver again just to kind of push it on into those sort of ideas of hacking, disruption, bringing game environments in a different way via technology into different domains, essentially.
So, hello. Heard a little bit about Unix before, which was nice. I'm a big Unix guy. So I'm going to start my presentation. What's it called again? It's called that's right. PDF. Yeah. Nothing moves. Mouse. No. Yep. So, in all seriousness, we're going to talk about a topic that most would think of as being hideously boring, and that's engineering. You can think of engineering. Well, a lot of people think of engineering as, if you like. Is anyone here called Brian? Actually, anyone here called Brian? Okay, sorry about this, Brian. But engineering's like the brine of the disciplines. You know, it's like, you know, maybe there's a guy like Tony, and he's like a surfer guy, and he's the hydro sciences guy or something like that. It's called Tony. And maybe there's a chick called River, and she's, you know, cultural studies. You know, she knows way too much about no wave or something like this. And, you know, maybe there's like Chris, and he's like a biochemist or something like this. But Brian's an engineer. You know. I mean, the dictionary description is just awful. I mean, it's the practical application of science to commerce or industry. It only has an application there, and I really want to try and unpack that a little bit and open up a new future for Brian. Engineering has brought us tremendous feats that have actually changed human culture, very much the way that people move and understand their world, and there could be no better example than the bridge. Without this feat of engineering, we would not have trade evolving in the way it's evolved. We probably wouldn't even have cross-pollination between languages and dances and arts and the like, were it not for the bridge. Some bridges actually span otherwise untraversable areas entirely. Another example of a kind of a bridge, or at least a bridging technology, would be the turbine engine. One that, of course, now propels people in the form of planes over vast stretches of water, giving them hideous jet lag. That's jet lag implemented right there. Look at that. Lots of rotation. Evil men. So the Smurfs. Another one, of course, is the submarine. The submarine has enabled us to see the world in an entirely new light. We actually realised that continents, as we've traditionally known them, islands, the tops of hills, and that the Earth is actually just a gigantic undulating surface. That there are forests in the water itself. I mean, this is a remarkable thing. This is a good example of engineering as literally extending the perceptual, phenomenological, if you like, horizon of what we can know of the world. Another good example of the sort of the inverse submarine somehow. the International Space Station, the opposite submarine, could have been called that. It's probably the Russian name for it, actually. But yeah, I mean, this is amazing. You get to actually, it's a habitat off the planet. One actually gets to be off the planet, observing the world and living independent of the world. I mean, this is incredible to actually exist independently from the very surface of the Earth, from the atmosphere that we understand sustains us, or allows for the possibility of life. This is another example of engineering. This is a bit of code I've been fooling around with. I think you ask most people, and they would say that engineering is complex and that its terms are abstract. So engineering already gets off on a bad foot. You know, while we understand that it transforms our lives and the very shape of the world as we understand it, it is somewhat opaque for most people, and this does become a bit of a problem. And I'm going to talk a lot about that in this lecture. Here is a good example of a work of engineering that was very popular in the early 1900s. Of course, it's the gramophone. I would describe this as a kind of self-describing object, actually. Maybe we just ask it to describe itself, but it already does. I mean, you can see the horn is where the sound comes out. You see the record itself spins, but only when you turn the crank. So you see the transfer of kinetic energy to actual movement. If you look close enough at the record, you'll see that there's a little needle on it, and the needle is actually conveying vibration. There's little tiny bumps on the record through to the horn. So this is kind of an open object. I mean, not only take an open form with the horn, etc., but it's an object that is somewhat a little bit more social than this. and the previous speaker also has a very nice parallel, I think, is also addressing this problem. This presents itself, the iPod Nano presents itself as a field of surfaces. One can think of the pictures behind glass metaphor, which a lot of people, of course, have been talking about as a basis for the critique of a kind of a touchscreen culture. Here we see nothing of the internal workings presenting themselves externally. In fact, if we were to actually open one up and see the guts, if you like, of this device, almost no one that you or I know could accurately describe what those parts do and why they are there and how they work. You know, some of us might, for instance, have insights into digital signal processing. We might have made a PCB or something, designed a PCB or something like this in our time, done some system and a chip development, which I do quite a bit of. But to actually unpack this takes a lot of work. So what we're seeing more of is this kind of shift from a world of open or more open self-describing objects, compressing down into sort of a field of effects and mysterious inner workings. But the very right to even open those objects is now increasingly contested. Imagine if, for instance, the automobile was to be protected by the same kinds of warranties that for instance, govern the iPod Nano or a laptop that you buy. Just to flip up the bonnet and change the carburetor or something like that would be to breach your very rights of ownership of that device, such that you couldn't get that repair paid for. And this itself is very much what I would describe as a political shift. More and more, we're in a situation where we can't even say that we really know. We're not even allowed to know, you could even argue, the very devices in our pockets. I mean, here, for instance, is a packet dump that I'm running right now, capturing packets from the network traffic in this room. And I can pull out host names and images and emails and websites from this stream. Right now, there are JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, SMSs, emails passing through our bodies as though the world itself becomes a kind of a cable. We make political choices when we develop and distribute technology. And I think as developers, this is a very, very important point. The moment that you are designing an object, you're already making political choices, political decisions. You're making assumptions about the audience. You're making you're setting limitations. You're allowing and restricting freedom of movement. But to actually develop openly is to break, increasingly, more and more these days, from a knowledge hegemony that encourages and actively exploits this consumer ignorance. And this really, I think, frames a bunch of what I'm going to be talking about. So when you do develop and distribute your work openly, what you're doing is you're increasing the critical potential of your audience. You're allowing for the possibility of further learning and most importantly, self-learning. I didn't study computer science. I've been programming since I was quite young. I've always been ruining things, in other words, taking them to pieces and trying to put them back together. And I'm addicted to learning. I'm a learning junkie. For me to be able to not get into something that I supposedly own is to have a relationship like I would be leasing that object. And much of what we would refer to as a technology in our environment is more taking the form of a lease or renting relationship than it is real ownership. Because to own is to have the right to destroy. To own is to take to pieces, to manipulate, to repurpose.
To repurpose at the end there. So yeah, just it's kind of just to expand briefly on a few ends of that, because I don't want to kind of prescribe it too much, but it's just quite interesting how quick this all opens up in many different directions between individuals' perception and use of devices, next to the legal aspects of that, next to the behavioral ones and how they all kind of are extrapolated into lived environments as such, and just that whole idea of not looking at the in-between and just assuming ends either for leisure or consumer purposes, or for like some sort of other form of critical thinking at the other side, or activism essentially. So we just want to just looking at, the idea of like public space and the ownership of that, which is the obvious sort of extension of where we need to talk about if we're talking about, social justice movements and, that sort of, shifts in that essentially where, who controls and owns public space as much as the domain of the smartphone in your pocket or the battle and challenge for your cerebral cortex and, who gets to kind of speak directly to you that way in that sort of dystopian Minority Report way that like Julian Oliver spoke of earlier. So we can see instantly if you just kind of remove these sorts of any signal or sign from the public space, it becomes quite an abstract and estranging sort of environment there. And that being one that, gives a measure of how much of this actually needs to be negotiated as such. I'll come back to this in a second, but, when I look at the social aspect of it, where these devices and different modes of, if we talk about engineering, even as far as social engineering or an individual or, someone who is going to kind of begin and start something and what that sort of adds to, and to do it in a way that, is shared and, agreeable and, inclusive. There's multiple ways of doing that from, what can be organized as, a flash mob for like some sort of bizarre dance routine, or something actually, trying to achieve something and renegotiate how this sort of public space is navigated and who is the owners or the key vital decision makers to that end, And these are the real questions, I suppose, that it's going to open up. Just want to comment on this would be one piece, kind of it's a prototype, as much a thought experiment as much as the reality, but the abilities to it to be right there. This transparency grenade, to my mind, like the ultimate game controller that you'd want to have, where this sort of catch-all snapshot of disinformation and an empowering device that kind of acknowledges a game aspect to it in some sense, and also kind of retrieves information and is empowering in a different way. Just the description to go with this was equipped with a tiny computer, microphone, and powerful wireless antenna. The transparency grenade captures network traffic and audio at the site and securely and anonymously streams it to a dedicated server where it is mined for information. Usernames, hostnames, IP addresses, unencrypted email fragments, web pages, images, and voice extracted from this data and then presented on an online public map shown at the location of the detonation. So, that's quite heady stuff, quite loaded, and kind of does bring this sort of idea of like a game environment full circle into, some sort of whistleblower capacity, essentially, where we're looking at there. So, this is where it's out of all the perspective, all the possibilities are open for how to use this technologies and how we use them being the vital thing, and our understanding of how alienating and overly familiar we've come to these things simultaneously. If we look at the Latour model of the black box being a kind of something which might describe the phenomena of how we're living right now and how overly gamified even our social and political environments are becoming. So just, this concept of collectivism, of, being an empowering source and something which is, it presents the specter of something empowering before we have fully experienced it, being one of the phenomena, I suppose, to come off this, where you can see how much traction, or if something's trending, or if it's vital, or if it's, advocacy, or if it's genuinely like, sustaining belief, life, moral and social democracy. At the same time, all those things are essentially trying to be closed down, and this being a vital end of it, as well. But likewise, and I'm gonna round it off pretty soon, but I just want to kind of we just throw one more scenario, and then I just want to throw a cautionary word on it before rounding off. But, again, we Mika White, who, involved in Occupy Wall Street, and then just sort of looking at, how social movements can function, or like game aspects being associated with that. I'll just read this very quickly. Imagine flash mobs of jammers that appear suddenly, function without leadership, and are the pure manifestation of an anonymous will of a dispersed, networked collective. Targets are suggested, actions are proposed, manifestos drafted, everything is voted on, and the next steps chosen within minutes. 1 hour neoclassical economics departments across the nation are flooded with kick it over manifestos, and the next an impromptu anti-banker street party is being held on Wall Street. One day 1,000 volunteers show up unexpectedly at a non-profit and ask to help out for a few hours, and the next overnight guerrilla gardens appear in the back streets. In the downtown night town, a flash trial has convened to sentence the swoosh to death row, and online hacktivists are leaking emails that expose city council shenanigans. In this kind of metagame, where a constant people's assembly determines the rules and objectives of the game, anonymous players vie to influence the erratic swooping of the swarm. Welcome to the thrilling world of wiki swarms, the culture jammer game being played right now, in which the future of Earth is at stake. So, you know, it kind of paints a scenario there, but there's some, you know, vital sort of many scenarios, but it's also the technology enabling that, and the behavior, the gamified behavior, the understanding of that stuff, enabling this sort of approach to things. All those being potentials, or much like this, could just be the consumer novelty trivialized version of it that we, you know, have in tandem with this. I just want to we'll talk about it again later, but it'd be, you know, disingenuous to kind of have this sort of conversation without that sort of note of like the seismic break in this sort of understanding of it, and what is regarded as being inclusive, and the dynamic aspects of it. And Gamergate is obviously thrown up as one of those things which has proved quite the phenomena at the time, and has just kind of expanded in many different guises, and, you know, it's kind of, you know, it has kind of sublimated into, you know, on-stream click, you know, activist culture, or different sorts of, you know, it's made things kind of entrenched and divisive in a lot of respects as well, you know. So that sort of idea of, you know, gamers growing up essentially, and that the inclusion of, like, you know, minorities or women in these sorts of conversations and game environments, and those things being exclusively off limits, essentially, all being challenged and negotiated, or, you know, even being contended if it was fact in the first place. All, you know, there's I suppose the vital part is here that there's it's easy to kind of, it gets riled up to a level of moral panics and social panics and subject, but it also really points to some quite hateful and disgusting behavior towards individuals, that all this same sort of activist, collectivist, you know, vying for some sort of, you know, a campaign and a model of that can extend this far, I suppose. And the same breath, you see a lot of people who do feel victimized about it as well. And the reasons for that are kind of the more interesting thing. So, you know, if we look at this quote, which would have spawned a lot of Gamergate in the first place, you know, just women speaking up for, you know, their rights as developers and makers and participants in game culture, and not being represented in the slightest with that. We have people like Leigh Alexander, who speaks about, you know, the end of a gamer as such, as, you know, that sort of notional idea of, you know, it being games for adolescent boys, essentially. When you decline to create or to curate a culture in your spaces, you're responsible for what spawns in that vacuum. So, you know, again, that can kind of speak towards the black box concept as well, of something being so familiar and so strange at the exact same time, or just being taken for granted, that, you know, something festers or opens up that then looks like really disastrous after that, you know. And we can just see how the ends that, like, we'll speak later on about where Gamergate has gone. But from its inception, I suppose we can kind of see that, you know, it's something that went unaddressed essentially for an amount of time, and just came back with bile and some versions of hatred on the back of that. So I just want to round it out with a report on Gamergate, and then I'll be back to close it off.
Violent depictions of women being beaten, raped, and run over by cars. It's not the movies, it's video games. And now the women calling for change in this multi-billion-dollar virtual industry are facing a very real backlash, including death threats. Here's my Nightline co-anchor, Juju Chang.
For Anita Sarkeesian, this is the new normal. Armed escorts at public events, tracking her every move.
I'm constantly aware of the fact that there's an enormous amount of hate
directed towards me.
Hate in the form of bomb threats, rape threats, even death threats. On this morning, high alert at Loyola University in Chicago. It's Anita's first speaking engagement since threats of a shooting massacre forced her to cancel her last appearance. All because this media critic dared to criticize something millions of us play every day.
Who plays video games?
Video games. The threats making splashy headlines around the world. On shows like Melissa Harris Perry.
The threat of violence? All too real.
And webcasts like Democracy Now! And HuffPost Live.
Violent threats for pointing out sexism in video games.
Things got heated, to say the least.
The harassment became part of what's now known as Gamergate. What started as an online spat about the ethics of gaming journalism quickly escalated into a full-blown culture war.
Women shouldn't be near disposable objects or symbolic pawns in stories about men.
And a small but hardcore group of gamers resistant to change.
God ordained that it is one man, one joystick.
But Gamergate doesn't just affect boys playing in a basement. The stakes are much higher than you might think. We're now spending more money on games than movies and music combined, to the tune of $21 billion. And what might surprise you, there are now more adult women playing video games than there are teenage boys. We're talking about fantastical scenarios like the ones in BioShock, and epic adventures in games like Mirror's Edge. What is it exactly that's so disturbing in some video games that's making women like Anita willing to face death threats?
Just when you think you hit the worst example or the most misogynist example, you find another one.
Escapism is big business. More than half of us are already playing games like this one, Grand Theft Auto 5. But critics say in these virtual worlds, things often take a turn toward the dark side.
As a player, you can solicit a prostitute, kill her, and if that's not enough, you have the option to run her over.
The sense of violence against women being used as almost background decoration, right? As texture to make an environment gritty, more real.
There are plenty of games that aren't violent or sexualized, but some of the best-selling games are especially egregious. On her website, Anita dissects these games.
Developers regularly utilize the brutalization of women's bodies, and especially the bodies of female prostitutes.
Her goal? To bring attention to what she calls the inherent misogyny in the gaming world.
I'll teach you!
In Watch Dogs, she points out how women are murdered to give the hero a reason to chase down a bad guy.
It gets worse and worse. It reinforces this idea of women as sexual objects, right? It reinforces this idea of women as playthings for their amusement.
And it's this kind of talk that makes her a target.
And that's when the sort of cyber mob, right, the hate mob descended.
Bombarding her with mostly anonymous tweets and messages. I will rape you when I get the chance. Hiding behind usernames and claims of free speech. I'm sitting outside your apartment with a loaded gun. Your neighbors won't hear you screaming in pain. Someone even created a grotesque game where players can beat and punch a picture of her face.
Ow!
But the virtual harassment turned very real when her online attackers published her social security number, her home address. And she's not the only one.
They told me they were coming to kill me. They told me specifically they were going to castrate my husband.
Women like Brianna Wu, an independent game developer, was even driven out of her home, all for simply tweeting her opinion.
When someone posts your address online and they tell you they're going to murder your whole family, you don't really feel safe staying at that location.
So far, the Gamergate harassment against Brianna and other women like her has remained online. But the FBI is taking it seriously enough that it started a file.
I'm so hesitant to use the phrase terror because I think it's such a politically loaded word, but it's terrorism on women in this industry. It's scaring every single one of us.
Why such hate? Why such anger?
I think a lot of it comes from this idea that gaming is a male-dominated space, right? And that games are for men by men. It's a very misogynist backlash. We are not meant to be treated with respect.
Something even the casual female gamer is sadly familiar with. Watch what happens when the men in this online session of Counter-Strike learn that there's a woman playing in their midst.
Are you an archaeologist? Because I have a big bone that needs examining. This is pretty lady. If I subscribe, will you give me a good kiss?
It's less brutal than what Anita and Brianna experienced, but it does show the ease with which offensive behavior is tossed out at women.
I'll give you my skins for some skin, if you know what I mean, huh, sexy lady, huh?
I'm really just here to play, like everybody else.
But she's not treated like everyone else, which is at the heart of Gamergate. Media critics argue women like Stephanie need to stop being abused as players in the real world and as avatars in the virtual world. And given that women make up nearly half of this country's gamers, this isn't a feminist issue, it's just smart business.
The demographics should be a huge wake-up call to executives of gaming companies, because there is a huge amount of money to be made out of taking women seriously and out of demonstrating to women that you are taking them seriously.
We've reached out for comment multiple times to Rockstar Games, Ubisoft, the companies behind these games, to ask about the way women are portrayed. But thus far, we've received no reply. And yet there are some signs of change in the gaming community.
It's just time to just realize things from a different perspective. It's time to see, how would someone else, how would a woman look at this?
More and more developers like Tim Schafer are seeing the need for more women programmers and more girl-friendly games, like Broken Age.
I'd better go find that knife. I mean, once you sat down and tried to play the game with your daughter and tried to find games where she can play a character that she identifies with, you start to feel bad about not putting that option in your own games.
Even Lara Croft, the famous Tomb Raider, got a makeover. More clothes, less curves.
I remember playing Tomb Raider Guardian of the Light, and it was produced by a woman, and it was like a really good game. The game did well, so we're going to see more of that.
The majority of gamers, like Chris Scott, manager of 8-Bit and Up, condemn Gamergate's threats of violence.
Which one is he? Which one is he?
But he's not alone in believing critics like Anita exaggerate the problem.
She's trying to capitalize on controversy.
He also says the gaming world on the whole shouldn't be judged by a few extreme examples.
Okay, when people complain about games like Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, or whatever, it's similar to complaining about hip-hop and rap music today, saying, well, it's violent. That's not what hip-hop is about. You can't judge gaming by what's selling. You have to really get into the medium to understand it before you start saying, well, this is what gaming is about.
Scott suggests, at the end of the day, they're just games.
I know in the real world there are strong women that don't need to be saved.
How do you respond to critics who say, well, this is fantasy, this is not reality, you have to lighten up?
Yeah, that's a fun argument. Games have a huge impact on our society, so it's not just fantasy. It actually works to potentially reinforce some pretty harmful messages about women.
For Nightline, I'm Juju Chang in San Francisco, California.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't want that to appear kind of tagged on at the end. It's something we'll talk about Gamergate and just sort of extensions of that in the lecture later on, but it would feel a bit disingenuous to kind of talk about social movements and all without sort of putting the, to talk about the elephant in the living room of like how divisive and attritional and, that sort of idea of campaigns and the technologies being used against individuals in a quite a malicious way. And in the same breath of like how much of that it can and should be expanded upon in a way to like really, benefit cultures and just any sort of social justice movements essentially further, and that being incapable or unable to happen until it is inclusive of women essentially. As I said, we will talk about that later on because there's strands off Gamergate which kind of do feed into broader aspects of gamified culture and in general. And we'll speak about that later, but I'm running well over, so I'm going to stop now. Next lecture will be on youth exploitation through digital games. Hope you found all that okay. Any questions, please send me an email